Dear viewers, welcome back after the break. Today we are talking about the latest update on coronavirus, and today we are discussing the latest update from the UK. And thank you so very much those of you who have joined us today via our website or our social media. For this segment, I have two very well-known politicians. I have on my first screen, I have Samuel Terry, Member of Parliament. He is from Labour Party. Samuel Terry, thank you so very much for joining us today.
No problem at all. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And on my second screen, I have Mr. Sean Bailey, Assembly Member. Mr. Sean Bailey, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Assalamu alaikum. Nice to see you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, both of you, for joining us today on NTV Europe. Today, we are discussing about the pandemic situation that we are going through, not just in the UK, all across the world. And you, two very prominent politicians, what you have been doing, to help the government or to hold the government into account. So, initially, I'll come to Sean Bailey, Assembly Member. If I ask you that, what would be the impact of coronavirus on UK's, UK's economy or UK's other socio-economic aspect, what would be the impact of it? I know this is a very unprecedented time. However, what is your stand? What is your thought? What would be the impact of this thing?
I think the impact is going to be large. Everybody knows that. And in the UK, the government have pumped a lot of money in to various aspects to support people. So one day they immediately took on 1 million members of staff, effectively pledging to pay people's income up to £2,500. There's lots of people having conversations now about what this means for people who rent, for instance. If you rent to a private landlord, the government has some ways of supporting you, and we're going to continue to look at more ways to support you. But beyond Corona, I think the big thing will be, what does the world's economy look like? All of the normal, natural things we would do economically will have been changed. The people who buy from us and the people we buy from will be in a very different situation. I think in London, we're aware of that, but for me in particular, I'm most concerned about employment. I know internationally everybody looks at London as a rich city, and it is, but we have many, many poor people here who need their employment. So that's the part I'll be focusing on most for me. How do we make sure those people are not put at risk? How do we get them back to work as quickly as possible? And how do they grow their income? Corona is dominating now, but for poor families, it's always been about income, and that situation won't change. And that's something that I'll be asking the government to really focus on, to make sure that the poorest continue to get a good income.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Sean Bailey, Assembly Member from Conservative Party. Mr. Samuel Terry, a Member of Parliament for Ilford South, you are from Labour Party. Are you happy the way government has been dealing with this pandemic situation in the UK? Are you happy?
Look, I mean, it's incredibly unprecedented times for any government, and I do have my sympathy in dealing with a very, very unexpected situation in terms of just the measures that have had to be put in place by the Chancellor and by the government. I mean, things that we were told were impossible essentially are now seemingly quite possible. I mean, look, I guess my criticism would be around two things. One, forward planning, particularly around protective clothing, PPE. One of the issues we've had with that is that certainly in many areas, people have been, local authorities have been forced to try and source their own equipment. And so there is in the wash-up after we get through this, and we will get through this, there's going to be a really serious question about how we better provide stocks. Because remember, back in 2016, there was a government sort of dry run, as it were, almost like a test. If a virus of this type actually hit the country, how would the NHS cope? What were the measures that need to be put in place? So people were aware that if something like this happened, we were going to have to really be quick to get our kind of ducks in a row when it came to the NHS side. And look, our NHS workers are putting their lives on the line often, working incredibly hard to try and get us through this. And we will get through it. I think on the economic stuff, I actually agree with Sean. One of the big issues that's coming through in my kind of inbox and people writing letters into me is around small to medium enterprises and businesses. There's a lot of provision that's been put in place by the government, but it's actually about whether that can be delivered to those businesses in time, and particularly in time for furloughed staff, so the ones that are going to be on the 80% income, whether they're going to actually reach that level of money, and that's going to be through the business and into people's pay packets, paid into their bank accounts for the April payroll, and that's a real concern for me. There's also a number of issues where people haven't quite met one criteria or another. So maybe the size of their business means that they're not quite eligible for a grant, they just miss out. And so one of the things I'm doing, I've actually got a meeting tomorrow with the Chamber of Commerce and all the local businesses in my part of East London to really ensure that the grants that are there from the government are getting delivered to those local businesses. Because as Sean says, if after this crisis, getting people back into work and getting people into decent, well-paid work, because all of the evidence shows that economically, if you look at the labour market, the sectors of people that have been hurt the most already are those that are younger, so 25 and below, those that are less likely to own their own home, and those that are from poorer communities. So they're already having the toughest time, despite already coming into it being in the toughest situation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Sam Terry, MP from Labour Party. Mr. Sean Bailey, Assembly Member from Conservative Party. Samuel Terry MP has raised a very important concern that people are disproportionately affected by this situation because of their age demography, because of their socio-economic or their educational background, because of their economic situation. We know that ethnic minority, particularly British Bangladeshi community or everyone, those who are watching this program, many of our people, they are involved with small and medium enterprises, and we know that small and medium enterprise, that is the backbone of this country's economy. And because of this pandemic situation, they are badly affected by that. What you and your colleagues in Conservative Party or in government, you planning to do to address this concern?
So there's a lot of things going on to help businesses who are impacted, and also individuals as well. I think if you look at the points being made, we've had to build a system that makes sure we respond to people we have records for. I think one of the challenges around small and medium enterprises, particularly if they're new ones, is do we have enough records tax-wise to then recognise them and fund them? And I think it will be up to politicians at every level to help answer that question. Largely, I think the government have got a good hand on that. HMRC in this country is pretty hard to avoid. Everybody will tell you the taxman is hard to avoid in this country. So the records are there, but it is about speed. There's no doubt about that. I've been speaking to a number of small businesses in this off time, and they are saying, yes, they're happy about the measures, but please, can it happen quickly? And I, for one, along with many people across the political spectrum, will be pushing the chart for speed. I know that the Treasury have drafted an extra shaft to make these things happen, but we just need it to happen now. This is about the survival of people's businesses, and for me, in London, about employment. And all the businesses we can keep good now mean that we'll have them to go forward, to go into our recovery. We will recover from this, but part of how quickly we recover is what we do now. How do we stand those businesses up? Also, that's why I talk about what we do for renters. Again, we have done a lot for people's employment, which will help their rent situation. We had lots of changes coming down the line before COVID happened to help renters around evictions and the like. Robert Jenrick has made very strong, given a very strong direction as to what should happen to make sure that nobody's evicted. Of course, people want much more reassurance around that, and we will push for that as well. But the key thing here is to make sure that we're clear with the message and that it happens quickly. People need these measures happen quickly. I believe the government are on top of it. The strategy is evolving because the situation's evolving, but they're doing a good job, and I believe that job will improve as time goes on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. We do have many phone calls online. We'll take a few phone calls and then we'll come to you. Caller, Assalamu alaikum. If you can kindly...
Walaikum salam. Shafiqul Alam Banli Tekka. I'm going to talk English.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shafiq Bhai. Thank you so much for watching our program. And thank you for your good feedback. Mr. Samuel Terry, Mr. Samuel Terry, you are MP from Labour Party from Ilford South. If I come to you asking same question, that what is Labour Party's alternative plan to help particularly ethnic minority, those who are disproportionately affected by these coronaviruses, particularly small, medium enterprises?
Well, I think that one of the things, that's really important at the moment is getting the government grants to people. So my local authority in Redbridge allocated around £50 million Now, of that, around 20 million has so far been given to those businesses. But because of some of the reasons that Sean outlined, or because when you're writing to a business that might well be closed, physically closed, it's actually been a bit of a struggle to get the money into the hands of the people that need it quickly enough. So one of the things we've been doing is producing all the literature and information in as many different languages as possible. You know, I've been doing a load of videos and working with the business community, not just writing to them, but talking to key people who are parts of the local Chamber of Commerce, you know, the local business development sort of organisation, so that we can ensure that people are aware of what's available. We've got all of that stuff on the local council website in a simple portfolio, and people can go to look at where their business fits in, what's available. And also, to be honest, I've had a couple of my staff members dedicated on this. One of the things that we're doing regularly is when organisations, whether they be small or slightly bigger businesses, come to us and say, look, we're really struggling, we've not quite fitted into some of these criteria, we're taking both to the Shadow Treasury team and the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy team, which I'm actually part of with Ed Miliband, the different problems, having a discussion, what can we then put forward as a solution, and actually on the whole, having this constructive dialogue with our counterparts in the government. Because I think one of the things that's been very interesting here is that, particularly in the first few weeks of the crisis, the former Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell, many of the plans that he put forward in the Trade Union Congress, TUC, put forward, were actually then going on to become government policy. So I think it's, you know, it's meant that things have changed. Perhaps things are, you know, that were, you know, perhaps traditionally the Conservatives wouldn't think were the way to do things, have actually now been sort of taken on board and done. And I think one of the key things for me is to ensure that once we are through and out of the lockdown, that those people who are suffering the most don't, you know, are the first ones to get the priority in terms of getting things in place, in terms of supporting them. So, for example, there are some really radical ideas that have been discussed around things like a universal basic income. There are ideas around how we can get some of the grants extended, and obviously, like some practical measures, local authorities are ensuring under government instruction that things like business rates are being alleviated for the majority of businesses, because obviously their income has just dropped through the floor. And look, what I would encourage any of your viewers to do, or listeners who are tuning in today, is if you can't get hold of your local authority, get hold of your local MP. They are here to help, no matter what party they're from. We can ask the questions. Now Parliament's actually back, albeit virtually today. We are having a dialogue with our counterparts in the government as Labour Party politicians, and it is broadly constructive, because actually it's in everyone's interest that we get through this and rebuild the economy afterwards. I think one of the key things that I would say, though, is that we can't necessarily go back to business as usual. I think if the government are taking stakes in lots of different companies and organisations, I think we ought to be then sort of saying as taxpayers, well, how do we get back the best value? You know, going forward, we've got a whole range of other crises that have almost been put on ice. You know, thinking about, say, the environmental crisis, a big issue in Ilford, certainly, you know, British Bangladeshis, because people back home in Bangladesh are already suffering directly from the climate crisis. So it's about saying to businesses, if we're going to support you now, how can we work together in the future to build a new and cleaner, greener economy?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Sean Bailey, Assembly Member from Conservative Party, there has been huge criticism from the expert that British government of dealing with this crisis was not actually adequate enough in the beginning, particularly the herd immunity strategy that they actually tried to adopt. Initially, it didn't work out, and because of that, many people died. How do you take that criticism, or what is your opinion on that? Particularly that herd immunity, that strategy didn't work, and it has huge ramification on people's life, and many people died because of that wrong strategy. Why lockdown now? Why not lockdown at the very beginning? Do you think British government was too slow to respond to this crisis?
I think that's a good question. I disagree with your assertion. I actually think the government's response has been spot on. Remember, very few decisions, if any at all, have been made because of politics. They've been made in response to the science. And if you look at the strategy was to make sure the NHS wasn't overwhelmed, so we could deal with the number of deaths we would have. The whole herd immunity thing was a response to the science we were given at that time. And then once we passed that point, we then went into lockdown. The lockdown strategy has largely been very effective. Its aim was to, in want of a better word, reduce the number of infections at any one time so the NHS could cope, so it could save lives. That has happened. We also wanted to give the NHS the capacity to deal with...
Yes, but why now? Why, Mr. Sean Bailey, thank you. I mean, why
timing,
not?
You go into lockdown too early, you destroy your economy for the long term. And also you have another rise.
But many people died because of that. We have seen, particularly, we have seen countries like Germany. They had expanded their testing capacity. Number one. Number two, they have adopted all those strategy at the very beginning, and now we can compare the number of people died in the UK, number of people affected because of this coronavirus is way more significant, way more huge in UK than Germany. Why didn't we follow Germany's example?
It's not true, is it? If you compare us to other countries that have also had a lower death toll, they've had no lockdown at all. What you have to look at is your population, your layout, how people move around. For instance, if you take London, 10 million people every day move around. There's no German city that is anywhere near that number of people moving around. I myself live out in Romford. I travel all the way in every day. Very few people do that kind of thing in Germany. We have an older population. We have a much more ethnic, diverse population. So you're not comparing like with like. Germany in particular had one great advantage. A big part of their industrial makeup is medical testing. So they had that there ready to go. We have to respond in relation to the population we have, the diversity we have, and the age spread we have. And I think that's been done correctly. That's why we went into lockdown when we went in. That's why there's been very little party politics about this, because everybody could see that we're responding to the science. It isn't about how the government feels. It's about what our scientists are telling us.
Right. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Sean Bailey. Mr. Sam Terry, MP from Labour Party, if I ask you same question, do you think British government was too reluctant to act at the very beginning, and because of that attitude, it has caused life of many people?
Look, I mean, I criticised Matt Hancock, who's obviously the Secretary of State for Health, directly in the Chamber and House of Commons about this very issue. And your viewers can go and see that, go on my Facebook page and have a look at what I said, because actually the government did pursue a strategy of herd immunity to start off with, and maybe that was under the guidance of those scientists at the time. Perhaps that was right, but certainly there were a number of interviews in which government ministers were saying that was the strategy. And about 3 weeks in, when clearly our kind of rate of infections was starting to go faster and faster and rapidly overtake even Italy's in terms of the seriousness of the situation, there was a U-turn. They adopted the strategy of saying, well, actually, this isn't going to work. The cost in terms of lives will be far too high. So we now will move into the lockdown situation. So my personal view is that, yes, the lockdown, has worked in my local authority area. Between 70 or 54% less, I was told today by our local trust chief executive, infections over the last couple of weeks. So that's working. But why on earth did we not adopt that as a strategy far, far earlier? And in fact, exactly for the reason that Sean says, because we are such a vast metropolis, thousands and thousands of citizens just travelling, on each tube line every day. And there was a real argument about getting those tubes shut, or at least lessened in terms of volume quite quickly, something I raised on the Transport Select Committee in Parliament. And so I'm afraid to say, I do think that there will be a heavy price to pay. We are now second only, if you include deaths in care homes, to the USA in terms of total level of deaths. And one of the things my constituents are asking me is also about, the impact on minority communities, because something that's been apparent, although it's not necessarily proven, but it does anecdotally at least seem that when you look at the NHS staff that have died, and we've had 3 doctors that have died in one part of our local trust in the last couple of weeks, that it's actually people from minority communities, Black and Asian communities, that are actually suffering even more than anyone else. And again, people are looking into the veracity of that, but it's something that people are really, really concerned about. So I think I assume there will be some form of public inquiry after this has all happened, and hopefully an independent inquiry, a bit like the Chilcot report, because actually, I'm afraid to say, I think tens of thousands of lives could have been saved with swifter action. And if you look at people like Anthony Costello from UCL, one of our top epidemiologists in the whole world, if we'd followed his advice, there'd be thousands of people over the past few weeks who wouldn't have had to go to their families' funerals.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Sean Bailey, Assembly Member from Conservative Party, we know that particularly doctors and frontline workers in NHS, those who are working day and night, to tackle this crisis, they are working relentlessly to tackle this pandemic situation, particularly doctor, nurses and healthcare professionals from ethnic minority. They are disproportionately affected by this situation. What does it reflect to government's view on ethnic minority?
I think there's two things that need to be said. Obviously I come from an ethnic minority community, and we were having this conversation very early on because many members of our community were dying. My auntie's partner died very early on, and we were starting to realise that we were dying at quite a rate. I myself and a number of people brought it up to the government. They then went to the NHS and said, you now need to record deaths and take ethnicity into that calculation as well, so that we could perform a study to make sure, to check, quite frankly, as Samuel was saying, to check if this is correct. Because if it is the case, and I believe there is a case to answer here, Robert Jenrick said he believes there is as well. If it is the case, we need to understand why. Why are people from our communities dying at a rate above anybody else's, if that's the case? So let's check that out. I think ultimately this isn't a reflection of Labour or Conservative politics. This is a reflection of whatever it comes. Is it something ethnic? Is it something about our genetic makeup? Is it something social? You know, you made the point that many of us work in hospitals. I would make the point that many of us work on transport. It's why very early on I was saying, why are we not observing social distancing on transport? I wrote to the mayor many a time, and in the end he did step my way, and he removed the there so people could drive in where necessary. But I still think there's work that needs to be done to allow people who have to travel. And remember, we are only talking about people who have to travel to
only essential workers.
But it's our communities that mostly don't own cars. It's our communities that mostly are in these jobs. Anything from working in the supermarket to being a surgeon, that means they have to go to work for the rest of us to survive, that are faced with taking this very brave step. So I will be pursuing the government very hard to understand what is behind these figures, because it is very important to understand what is it that affects our communities. I personally, of course, have a stake in that.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much. A further follow-up question for you, Mr. Sean Bailey. Recently, in recent time, we have seen that there has been some sort of hostility for the immigrants, particularly from your colleagues from the Home Office.
Sorry, I missed the first piece.
There has been some sort of hostility for the immigrants community, particularly from the Conservative Party. We know that in many parts of the world, particularly in Europe, that they are saying that there will be some sort of amnesty for illegal immigrants. There will be some sort of there will be some sort of scheme where all those undocumented immigrants will be bring to the system. Do you think there will be some sort of declaration from the British government? There will be some sort of declaration from the Conservative Party. They will think this situation in a more human and kind way to give a chance to illegal immigrants, to give a chance to undocumented immigrants. What is your stand on that?
I think this first thing first, I don't agree with the assertion of your question about hostility directly from the Conservative Party. I don't think that's correct. People will always talk about immigration. I of course, am the children of immigrants, so it's a question that's very high in my mind, and I hear it a lot, and it's discussed across the political piece. So I push back on that slightly. I can't say if the government will have an amnesty on illegal immigrants or any other type of immigrant. That's not for me to say. I'm not part of the government. But I will say this, we now have a government that has control over its immigration system, and the initial way they've laid it out means a much fairer immigration system for people all around the world, as opposed to just parts of the world. It does mean there's flexibilities that are built in there that we can then campaign for the government to change. Anything from, we can talk about different regions of the world or different different industries, for instance, anything from fruit picking to bankers to chefs. But you need to have full control of the immigration system to have that conversation. I believe that conversation will come. COVID will not eradicate that. There's certain issues that go on in this country that are perennial. I think that's one of them, immigration, and will come back at some point and will be discussed. And I think it's incumbent on politicians like myself who understand that, have a stake in that, and understand the realities of an immigrant community to be involved in that. And you can rely on me to make representations where necessary, where I have the right to do so. But I think it's a conversation for all of the country, and us in London, who have the broadest social and ethnic background, should have a bigger voice in that, because we know the benefits of immigration and what it can mean for our economy going forward. So actually, yes, I look forward to having that debate.
Right, excellent. And the diversity, the ethnic diversity, particularly in London, that makes the greatest city on earth, isn't it? Do you agree to that? That the diversity, it brings more color, it brings more ideas, more potential to this greatest city, and the government, not just conservative government, any government that should recognize that. Do you agree to that?
100%. London isn't great because of just Londoners. It's great because of its place in the world. The reason we have big banking, big insurance is because we have connections around the world. My parents are from the West Indies, you know, and that's a connection we have there. I work with people who are from Africa. I work with people who are from India as well. Our broadness is what makes us relevant to the world. And even if you look at COVID for a second, I believe it'll be a place like London that comes up with a cure for COVID. We'll always be part of that conversation because we have the broadest set of people looking at any given problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Samuel Terry, MP from Labour Party, if I ask you that, do you think that considering how relentlessly the NHS workers, even many of the NHS workers, we know that doctors, nurses, people, those who are working on front line, they come from all ethnic background. Many of them, they are immigrants. Do you think this is the right time for the current government to change their views on immigrant, and they should see this matter in more human way? They should be more kind, and particularly for undocumented immigrants, there should be some sort of amnesty from the government. What do you think of it?
So look, I mean, as you can imagine, being an MP for Ilford, you know, a large kind of number of inquiries are around immigration issues, about the Home Office being too slow to get back to people sadly often who are perfectly bright and intelligent and capable of working and often qualified, you know, in some cases left in limbo for years and years. And, you know, look, one thing I would disagree with Sean is to say that, you know, he himself might have progressive views on immigration. I'm not necessarily convinced that some of the people making policy for the government have been over the last few years. I mean, you know, many of my constituents were the actual victims of, you know, the sort of hostile environment and all of that kind of carry on. I think one thing that's been really clear, and from my point of view in terms of the people that come into my surgery and needing help, we've got people that are working in the NHS at the moment that want to get full status as British citizens, hopefully eventually. And I actually am personally in favour of there being a really clear pathway for that to happen. And that, you know, if you're coming to this country and working and you're putting your life on the line, then actually people, in my view, can earn the right to become British citizens. And we should make sure that pathway is really clear and really open. I mean, we have, you know, when we're not in the COVID situation, tens of thousands of people that are IT workers from India. Those people get on a pathway to citizenship.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Samuel Terry, a further follow-up question for you. Do you think, particularly this crisis time, everyone, forgetting your political differences, everyone should work closely and help the government, not just Labour Party, Liberal Democrats, every political party in the UK, all of you, all politicians, everyone should come together by forgetting your differences and help the government to tackle this crisis. What do you think of that?
I think, to be honest, that is actually broadly what's been happening. As I said, look, you know, before I became an MP, I worked for a transport union dealing with workers across London in TfL and, you know, London Transport for nearly 8 years. And certainly from my point of view, I've never known a situation, talking to former colleagues, where the level of communication between the Department for Transport and ministers and those that represent the workers running those services has been so good and so clear. And so people who in the past have maybe found themselves, you know, at different sides of the negotiating table are now actually working together to come up with constructive solutions to help everyone move forward.
So you guys are politicians, you guys are working closely with the government to tackle this crisis. Is that something you are suggesting?
Well, I mean, look, the government has literally taken up suggestions that the Labour Party has put forward. So I think if that, can't be seen as a way of, putting forward suggestions and work in a constructive way. But equally, look, we are the opposition. Our job is to hold the government to the account. And, as I said, I've given it to Matt Hancock both barrels when I thought they got it wrong, because that's going to attack them when, without putting forward solutions. So, for example, a number of people have been calling for a new minister to be appointed to oversee logistics and supply. It doesn't currently exist, but actually, given one of the issues was not just the production of PPE in this particular crisis, but then a delivery of it. Those are the kind of constructive suggestions that can be.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Sean Bailey, we need to finish our program very soon. Your final message for British Bangladeshi community or ethnic minority or everyone, those who are watching this program, what would be your final message to them? We know that the month of Ramadan is coming very soon. What would be your message to them?
Just before I say that, I'd like to agree with Samba. I think he's right. This has been very constructive. I've asked the mayor to do a number of things and he's done them. So I do believe politicians are working this through as a group. We can have our political differences on the other side. As for my Muslim brothers and sisters, I'd just like to say Ramadan Kareem and stay safe during this time of Ramadan. I know it's normally a big gathering of family and such a celebration, and it'll be affected by Corona. Stay safe, enjoy yourselves, and enjoy Ramadan. Ramadan Kareem to my brothers and sisters.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Samuel Terry, what would be your final message? Thank you.
Absolutely. Look, it's really difficult at this time. Lots of people who would normally be celebrating Ramadan together, maybe you're going to have to do what we're doing, jump on a kind of phone, do a Zoom call. I certainly done that on Easter Sunday when we were celebrating a few weeks ago as well. And to all my constituents and people across East London, look, one of the key sort of messages about Ramadan is about family and about helping those that are less fortunate. And the thing that I've found most inspiring is the amount of work that's been done by mosques, by our local Bangladeshi Welfare Association, people working alongside the Gurdwaras, churches, trade unions, councils, to actually go and help those people that are most vulnerable. And so I think actually at this time it's about reflecting on the good things that this crisis has shown. That we actually do about each other as neighbours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. Thank you, Mr. Samuel Terry, MP from Ilford North from Labour Party. Thank you, Mr. Sean Bailey, Assembly Member from Conservative Party. Thank you so very much. Stay safe wherever you are. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Dear viewers, today on NTV Europe, we were discussing the current pandemic crisis from UK's perspective, and we had senior Metropolitan Police Officer, Borough Commander from London Borough of Tower Hamlets and Hackney, and then later on we had two politicians from two main parties of the British politics. They were discussing what they have been doing to tackle this crisis. Our message to you would be stay safe wherever you are. Follow government's lockdown processes. Thank you very much for watching NTV. Thank you and see you soon.